6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, the home of Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. And there they gave a dinner for him. Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those at the table with him. Mary took a pound of costly perfume made of pure nard and anointed Jesus' feet and wiped them with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of perfume. But Judas Iscariot, one of the disciples, the one who was about to betray him, said, "Why was this perfume not sold for 300 denarii and the money given to the poor?" He said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. He kept the common purse and used to steal what was put into it. Jesus said, "Leave her alone. She bought it so that she might keep it for the day of my burial. You always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me." The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
The story that we read this morning is a story that appears in all 4 of the gospel accounts, albeit each author has a slightly different version than the other ones. In some accounts, the woman who is named Mary in what we read this morning remains nameless. In some, we are only told that she is a woman of ill repute, one who begs for the forgiveness of her sins, no telling what kind of sins, although we have imagined many. Other gospel writers say that she should be remembered whenever the good news is proclaimed. And in some stories, the woman anoints Jesus' head, and other stories she anoints his feet. And then there's the issue of her hair. Not all accounts make such a big deal of her hair. She doesn't always use her hair to wipe Jesus' feet. So each author has their own version of the story, but each one takes the time to tell it. So we know there's something important in it, something that might make us feel a little uncomfortable because it hits close to home. Something we can't quite put our finger on, something we can't identify or maybe even know for sure, given all of these different accounts. But it is a fascinating story, and all of the authors agree on one detail, and that's that one of the main characters, the woman, never says a single word. As John's Gospel offers this story, it occurs at a dinner party with close friends. There is a shared intimacy there. There is relationship there between Jesus and Lazarus and Mary and Martha and Judas. Yes, Judas is invited to the party too. The way that the author tells this story is very intimate, and there's a lot of emotion that lingers in the air. In this gospel, Lazarus was just raised from the dead, and there has been a great deal of sadness and grief, loss, followed by surprise and rejoicing and risk. Lazarus was not raised without risk, and everyone who's at the party knows it. There is this vague sense among those who are gathered there to celebrate dinner together that they know the number of dinners they have left together is limited. It's as if Lazarus' death has awakened in them a sense of the sacredness and brevity of life. They don't know exactly how many times they'll be able to gather and eat together, but they know that this can't last forever. So there's an urgency about this meal. There's a renewed interest to embrace the time that they do have. There is an interest to make the time together count. And it's important for them to be intentional about how they use their resources to voice their feelings about and for one another. It's a story that focuses on the things that we can sense: hands, feet, hair, flesh, a fragrance that fills the entire room. In today's world, I'm not sure that this story would work at all. Each one of us is encouraged to stay within our own bubble. We are warned not to get too close, to be aware and cautious of the ways that we engage other people, to leave space between our bodies and the next body, even when we're sitting in the pews. Make sure you're not touching anyone. Public displays of affection are discouraged and even looked down upon, not just between lovers, but between parents and children, between good friends, and even between teachers and students. All of this while we complain that we feel more disconnected and lonelier than ever before in our history. Now, for sure, some of these unspoken cultural rules have their place. We have learned from past mistakes, not all touching is wanted or good. But sometimes I can't help but wonder if we have thrown the proverbial baby out with the bathwater. Are we missing something here? Fortune magazine recently published an article stating that over half of Americans report feeling lonely. This article was informed by a study that was performed by the Cigna, the health insurance company, along with researchers at UCLA. And they interviewed over 20,000 people for this study and found that 54% said no one knows them well. 56% said the people that they surround themselves with are not necessarily with them. And another 40% said they lack companionship, that their relationships are not meaningful, and they feel isolated from others. Now, in times of crisis or times of high emotions, like the death of a friend or a family member, these feelings of loneliness become even more pronounced. It is often not until a friend or family member dies that loved ones end up feeling like they wished they would have spent more quality time with those they loved before they died. So in our reading this morning, it is important for us to recognize in John's telling of this story that the smell and the feel of death still permeates the air that supplies this dinner party. It was only in the previous chapter that the author tells us that Jesus was greatly disturbed when he went to Lazarus' tomb, and that Martha responded to Jesus' command for them to remove the stone that sealed the tomb, saying, "Lord, already there is a stench, because he has been dead for 4 days." But Jesus was not deterred, and he brings Lazarus back to life, setting in motion a series of events that will lead people to plot Lazarus' second death and Jesus' death. So when we read about Mary anointing Jesus in the Gospel of John, we read it with the experience of what just happened at the tomb in the background. The 4 days of anguish and lament and mourning. The expensive nard they had probably just used to anoint their brother's body, a task that was usually designated to women family members. And there's the open tomb, recently unoccupied, waiting to accept its next and more permanent resident. Deaths tend to make everyone tense and anxious. Feelings of loss and grief can be so overwhelming that they can no longer be pushed down or held back, and so they uncontrollably begin to bubble up to the surface. Emotions run higher than normal, and friends and family members often argue or criticize one another rather than clinging to one another. And one well-intended but unhelpful comment can lead to a disaster. Most people can't help but function in a scarcity mode, counting up the cost of every little thing, every missed opportunity, everything left unsaid, everything left undone, everything left. It is within that context that Judas sputters out his words, perhaps not really getting a fair shake from this author. It is within that kind of context that Martha serves, putting one foot right in front of the other, trying to continue on as she has always done, even though everything has changed. It is within that context that Mary pours out her treasure, wasting it, giving it all away, as she begins to recognize that everything we hold dear is worth absolutely nothing in the face of death. Things cease to be treasured if there is no one with whom we want to share them. Her gratitude mingles with her grief as she anoints Jesus. She is either unaware or no longer cares about her cultural surroundings. Time is too short. Life must be lived and lived abundantly. And before she even realizes what she's doing, she empties out an entire container of nard onto Jesus' feet and unbinds her hair and begins wiping his feet with her hair. And I wonder if she's even conscious of what she's doing. Or was she just so caught up in the emotion of it all that she just did what came naturally? She just did what she may have always wanted to do, no longer weighing the risks, no longer anticipating the consequences, only wanting to show the people she loved how she felt. And so with death and gratitude and fight and flight all lingering in the air that fills the room, she suddenly comes to her senses and realizes there's no need to hoard, no need to worry, no need to push down or hold back or tamper all of the things that she wants to express. She did not want to anoint another corpse. She wanted to anoint life, abundant life, and it was standing right in front of her. Hands, feet, hair, flesh. In the Gospel of John, the author tells us that Jesus' ministry begins with an extravagant act of abundance at the wedding of Cana, at a celebration of the commencement of a relationship. Jesus performs his first sign at the urging of a woman named Mary. She is present with him. And he doesn't seem to understand why he should care that the hosts have run out of wine, but Mary tells him they have no wine. And so Jesus turns water into wine, lots of wine, good, expensive wine, more than enough. And in our passage this morning, Jesus' ministry is coming to an end. The Passion narrative is about to begin, and everything that happens after this in this gospel leads Jesus to the cross. And I don't think that it's a mistake that as Jesus' ministry ends, there is another extravagant act of abundance. And the setting is not the commencement of a relationship, but the culmination of relationship, a celebration of friends and lives well lived. And a woman named Mary is present with Jesus. And although she may not understand, Jesus does. Leave her alone. She has bought it so that she might keep it for the day of my burial. You will always have the poor with you, but you will not always have me. Those words must have been strange and overwhelming for those gathered to hear. Because in a world where we feel so much loneliness and pain and grief, we can't help but worry about our own hearts. Oftentimes we seal them up. We protect them from hurting by restricting relationships, by holding one another at an arm's length, by busying ourselves with tasks, by criticizing the other and ceasing to engage in relationships. Perhaps we're just so fearful that our hearts will break open and spill out their entire contents so that everything is wasted and there will be nothing left. In our reading this morning, Mary and Jesus show us it doesn't have to be that way. When death and loneliness permeate the air that we breathe, only a fully broken heart that dares to pour out everything for another has the power to save us. The author of John asks us to keep the whole story in mind, because each moment, from beginning until the very end, is alive with the possibility that any one of us might be transformed by a gesture of love or an extravagant act of abundance that we did not anticipate or plan for, that we receive from another. And such Christ-like behavior may indeed leave us with nothing left and everything to gain. Amen.